Ever say this to someone who asks you, everything's fine, and smile through the pain so you wouldn't have to take care of their pain? Let's talk about this. People who are in narcissistically abusive relationships, not only have you had to do the sort of seemingly impossible task of having to adjust to long-term psychologically abusive situations, you also have to live and get through and navigate the world at large, right? There may have even been a time when someone asked you how are you, and you've been honest. Like, for example, a person just says, hey, how you doing? And your response would be like, it's been tough. Or maybe you were trying to explain what was happening with a toxic parent or a toxic spouse or partner or toxic boss. And then you may start to try to share with them some of what's happening in your life. Some people listening to you may be quiet when you tell them because they don't know what to say. Some folks, as you share this with them, may feel helpless because there's nothing they can do. And some people may look at you a little sideways, like, wait, what? Come on, can't you just talk to them? I don't understand. Why would they yell at you if you were just trying to help them? People just don't get it. And ultimately, you may learn to not really ever answer the other person's question about how you are feeling honestly, because it's just too hard. And frankly, you may not even want to give them the honest answer because now you may even feel bad. Now the other person's uncomfortable. The nature of lots of people in narcissistic relationships is that you feel compelled to take care of other people, even if you barely know them. Now, over time, you may feel stranger and weirder and odder because nobody gets what you're going through. So you start to get really good at answering that question that people ask you, hey, how are you? How's everything going? And you say, everything's great. I'm good. Yeah, everything's fine. And you smile through the hurt and the anger and the confusion and the pain and the general upset. And you say, I'm great. Everything's great. Yeah, things are going great. And you do that so you don't have to explain the unexplainable. So you don't have to be the explainer of a narcissistic relationship. Maybe to some people out there who believe that everyone can be communicated with if you're just clear enough, or that families have each other's backs. And maybe all of these things happen because it's just a misunderstanding. And frankly, sometimes people do get it, but they feel helpless. And there's nothing to be done, and they know it. I myself have even felt like this with clients whose situation was sort of seemingly impossible. But survivors are in a terrible position because not only are they living through an impossible situation and feel eternally helpless and hopeless, but they also may even feel compelled to not tell other people because they know they will feel helpless and awful. Or you may not even want to be the person who bursts their bubble because they like holidays and family get-togethers and seemingly normal, likable stuff. The inauthenticity of the survivor's life goes beyond the inauthentic lives we have to live in these relationships. It extends into the larger landscape of very rarely ever being able to share what's going on with other people who ask you how you're doing. Maybe because you don't want them to feel helpless too, because you know there's nothing they can do about it, because you know talking about it is not going to change anything, and that at some point there's almost a terrible stew of shame for being in this kind of a relationship or being from this kind of family, a helplessness and an existential hole that pervades your life if you are in one of these relationships, and especially if there's no easy way out, and then you find yourself having difficulty in getting the social supports you need because you don't want someone to have to hear your helpless, sad, demoralizing story that has no solution, and then they feel bad themselves. In essence, you may feel that there's no place to turn because you don't want to be a burden. And that is what we're told all along in these relationships, that we're a burden. That we're a burden if we want something for ourselves, or express a need or a want or a preference or a hope or an aspiration, that we're a burden, that we are the problem. So we sure as hell don't want to invite that from other people. It's how many of us who have had one narcissistic relationship get pulled into other narcissistic relationships. We're more likely to get stuck in relationships where we cannot express our needs or who we are and not question it. The overdeveloped empathy of people in narcissistic relationships is largely a safety response. The idea that if we cared enough, if we took care of the narcissist enough, then maybe they would stick around or see us or care for us or really see us clearly. Most survivors become really good at empathy in an attempt to survive. And then that overdeveloped empathy muscle meant that we may not even feel that we can share about our narcissistic relationships with other people. So we don't give them something to think about or deal with or even just muddy their view of the world. Our hypervigilance and our hyperempathy for other people means that when it's all said and done, there's very little left for ourselves. So many survivors become masterful at the "everything's fine, how are you?" I personally have the very well-rehearsed, "oh, I'm doing great, things are great." Sometimes I'll mix it up with a little, "oh, I'm so busy these days, you know how it is," but that's about as bad as I let it go. I can't count on one hand the number of folks who can hear "not so good" with an open heart. That small number of folks who know my whole backstory. Listen, none of us want to be the downer, the bummer, the person who always has a gray cloud over our head. In fact, fun fact, I will often study how seemingly normal-ish people from what I know to be normal families and who have normal relationships go through the world and respond to "how are you?" and how they spontaneously will say things like, "oh my gosh, so great, things are so great," and they'll say, "I'm amazing." And I suppose now that I started thinking about this video, maybe not all of them are telling the truth either. I also know that there's a whole world of pop psychology type coachy folks who will say that if you can just say that you're great, then you'll feel great. Well, I can speak on behalf of most survivors to say that's not true. It's not just a double-edged sword what happens here. It's a multi-bladed sword. It's the having to hold back on sharing on how we are doing out of shame. It's the having to hold back because we don't want to burden others with the heaviness of our stories. It's the having to hold back because we learn to be inauthentic and performative to survive in these relationships. And when things get really hard, at some point, you do sometimes hit that wall where you just can't smile anymore. And you just can't lie anymore. And you also can't bear to tell people the truth. So what happens then? You hide and you isolate. Ironically, one of the key tools for healing is social support. But what if that goes away or becomes inaccessible? Because it also feels simultaneously too precarious to be honest with other people about how your life's going. The performative, "I'm fine," has its place. Work, the coffee shop where you get your coffee or tea, the conversational filler. But it is important that you are aware of your answer to that question for yourself. And no, not everyone you know gets to hear the truth, because most people can't handle it or frankly are not interested. But I ain't buying some BS positivity angle that if you say you're happy, then you are. Because when we are too performative and too inauthentic, it catches up with us. Once again, I wish I had some magic answer here. There are other ways of expressing ourselves when we can't tell people how we are, like writing it down or safe spaces to share it like a therapist who gets it and can hear it. But it can get really lonely really fast when we go through a world where we simply feel that we almost never are able to answer the question, "how are you?" honestly. Thanks again.